Hi everyone, I'm Tom Fitton, Judicial Watch President, here with our weekly update live on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Thanks for joining us this week. This is a special edition of Facebook Live and our Twitter Live and I guess YouTube Live because we're going to do a bit of a deep dive on the deep state. A lot of controversy this week about what the deep state is up to, and Judicial Watch doesn't just come on and talk about this issue and complain about it. We're in court trying to uncover and confront the corruption of the deep state and expose the corruption generally here in Washington, D.C. Corruption that's protected by oftentimes unlawful government secrecy. And some of this discussion is probably going to be pretty upsetting to you, especially when you learn about what Trump administration appointees are doing to protect both Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama in terms of covering up information about their potential corruption, and I say that charitably, and certainly the consequences of accountability for that by releasing that information to the American people. We're battling the lawyers for the Trump administration repeatedly in federal court on all these issues, and I'll get into that. Also big news this week about the Trump-Russia investigation, and it looks like, again, President Trump was right about what the Obama gang was up to in terms of targeting and surveilling him and the Trump team generally. We'll talk about that. But there's a lot to get to, including a report to you about Judicial Watch's appearance in court this morning on a very important issue. And it relates to Hillary Rodham Clinton. Now, a few years ago, Judicial Watch began asking questions about Mrs. Clinton's Whitewater investigation. You may recall that Mrs. Clinton was subjected to a grand jury investigation and an Office of Special Independent Counsel investigation over her involvement in Whitewater and other matters. So there were all sorts of documents Judicial Watch was able to get, but it turns out there was a draft indictment of her involvement, draft indictment drafted by the prosecutors. They never filed it because they didn't think that they could get her convicted, but the government is withholding that from us. And why are they withholding it? And this, of course, began under the Obama administration. They made the argument. They're telling us there's A, grand jury secrecy, and B, Mrs. Clinton's personal privacy needs to be protected here. And our essential legal argument in response to that is we already know what went on, in the sense that much grand jury material has already been released through the special report issued by Ken Starr's Office of Independent Counsel, or her successor. And of course, Judicial Watch also got other documents detailing all sorts of grand jury material. So there's really no more grand jury secrecy or privacy to protect anymore. Now, the lower court ruled against us, and so we were before the appellate court here in the D.C. Circuit, which is just down the street. You can't see it from, I know I'm pointing to it, but we're just a few blocks away, and I think I can see the court from our offices here. So our attorney, Paul Orphanides, was in court today, and this is the troubling aspect. Battling lawyers for the Trump administration who are in court defending Hillary Clinton's, in my view, non-existent privacy interest in keeping this information about her past corrupt activities secret from the American people. Again, lawyers from the Trump administration. Attorney General Sessions runs the Justice Department. His appointees run the Justice Department. They are defending Hillary Clinton essentially in court. So I can't tell you how sad it is and disappointing and outrageous it is to go to these court hearings, and I'm sitting in the audience. I'm not a lawyer, so I get to sit and watch and see lawyers for the Trump administration defending Hillary Clinton's privacy interests. I don't know why on earth they would be defending her, and if I were President Trump, he should demand to know why his agencies are defending Hillary Clinton like this. Why is this happening? So we were in the court today, our lawyer was in the court today, and I don't know how it's going to go. You're peering at, when you go, this is what happens when you're in, I'm a non-lawyer, so forgive me if I don't get all the technical aspects right. But essentially you file a lawsuit at the district court level, at the federal level, to get access to documents under the Freedom of Information Act, which is the law that we use. And if you get an adverse result, the court rules against you over the fight you're in, you can appeal it to the circuit court, the appellate court. And so we're at the appellate court hearing here. There are 3 judges. And the courts were skeptical. They said that there would have to be extraordinary circumstances to release this draft grand jury indictment, or this draft indictment. And we said, essentially, it's paraphrasing the argument, well, there are these extraordinary circumstances here. All of this information is already out there. We already know there was an indictment made. We already know the sum and substance of the grand jury information there. We already know what Mrs. Clinton is alleged to have done wrong because of not only the Office of Independent Counsel special report, but also the report prosecutor memo that Judicial Watch obtained through the Freedom of Information Act. So there's really no more privacy or grand jury secrecy to protect. And, my personal opinion is it's Hillary Clinton, and the courts are going to be skeptical of our efforts to hold her to account because she's part of the protected class. I just don't understand, and I've been doing this since 1998, working at Judicial Watch as Judicial Watch president. So I've seen a lot of court cases, and time again, the courts carve out exceptions when it's inconvenient for the politicians that are being protected or being put in the crosshairs as a result of our legal efforts to hold them to account through the Freedom of Information Act. We saw it during the Clinton administration, we saw it through the Bush administration, we saw it during the Obama administration, and now we're seeing the permanent bureaucracy, the deep state, once again working to protect Hillary Clinton. And I thought President Trump was going to change this. And based on what I know about what his views are, he doesn't want this to happen, but it's still happening. So I think we need to hold Jeff Sessions accountable. We need to hold Rod Rosenstein accountable. We need to I don't know who's running the National Archives now. Whoever's running the National Archives is where these records are. We need to hold them accountable. But again, Judicial Watch was in court today trying to get access to this basic information about Hillary Clinton's misconduct, and we're being fought by Justice Department lawyers for President Trump. And I know why they don't want this material to come out, because it just shows, and it's a reminder about some of the issues Mrs. Clinton has. Now remember, Mrs. Clinton is just not your average citizen. We're not asking for a draft indictment of some poor sap who was looked at and they decided not to prosecute. She was the spouse of the president at the time. She was a senior advisor to the president at the time. She became a senator, a secretary of state, a 2-time, although failed candidate for the presidency. She's now on a gigantic book tour that, frankly, is without precedent for former candidates. She says she's still involved in politics. And we're in court arguing that there's a public interest, or having to make the argument against this administration that there's a public interest in getting information about not only what she was up to, but what the Office of Special Counsel or Independent Counsel was up to. And there was an argument broached today saying, and I don't think the courts buy it, well, the Office of Special Independent Counsel is no more. It's been substituted by, or the successor has been the Special Counsel regulation, the Robert Mueller investigation, which kind of makes our point that we want to know how special counsels operate. Do they take care of the politicians in inappropriate ways? I mean, the material we have, and I encourage you to go to our website and Google the following: Whitewater Documents, a criminal case against Hillary Clinton, where we detail the criminal case in the documents we already have. These are quotes from the prosecution memo. The Castle Grande transactions were crimes. Now, Castle Grande was a transaction Hillary Clinton was involved in, and they were alleging that they were crimes. Hillary Clinton, quote, destroyed her personal records. Does that sound familiar to you? A case of possible obstruction of justice. The April 1998 document says Clinton's sworn statements to the Resolution Trust Corporation, which was a federal agency, the FDIC, and the Senate and the House of Representatives, and to the Office of Independent Counsel, reflected and embodied materially inaccurate stories. The memo uses the terms crimes,
criminal, fraudulent, misrepresented, inaccurate, deceive, mislead, misstatement, and concealed 27 times in 20 pages. You've got to go online and read that document. If we can link it in the Facebook or link to the release in Facebook and the comment feed and maybe in the Twitter feed, we'll do that. But it's a devastating analysis of what Mrs. Clinton was up to. And essentially she was involved in a transaction related to a bank, a savings and loan in Arkansas. And she was the lawyer involved in this transaction, which was later found to be fraudulent. And her involvement and her law firm's involvement was hidden also from the FDIC and the Resolution Trust Corporation because the law firm was actually hired to represent the interests of the bank. And they were conflicted out. But rather than deprive themselves of federal money, they withheld that information from the government. So they could get the government contract to represent this bank that they had a conflict of interest with because they were supposed to be representing the government's interest and the bank's interest in getting fraudulent money that may have been taken, when in fact they were involved in maybe some of the fraudulent activities that they were supposed to be working for the bank on, working for the bank to rectify. And Hillary Clinton was implicated in that, and it's one of the reasons the prosecutors allege she destroyed records. Now, some of this may be old news to people. You say, oh, well, who cares? I just got to say this generally. You know, the left and this establishment doesn't want to do anything about corruption. They never want to do. There's always an excuse not to do anything. We had an election and we should just leave Hillary Clinton alone. As if an election is a get-out-of-jail-free card for corrupt politicians who deserve to be held accountable to the rule of law. Let's say you got caught doing something at your job and you got fired for it, but it was a crime. Do you think prosecutors would say, oh, well, you got fired, so let's bygones be bygones? But as far as Washington is concerned, elections are kind of like an event horizon, past which no corruption can be ever pursued. So if it was raised during a campaign and then there was an election and the losing side was corrupt and criminal, well, we can't talk about it anymore because they lost the election and let bygones be bygones. This, by the way, from the same crowd that is going around tearing down statues of 19th century politicians because they don't like their views on certain issues. But we're not allowed to talk about Hillary Clinton. We're going to keep on talking about the corruption of Hillary Clinton and the Barack Obama administration because we need our government to start holding corrupt government officials to account. And we do it our way by suing in federal court. Now, speaking of corruption, so the hearing took place. The argument went on for about 45 minutes. And so what happens is you make your case. Lawyers who nominally report to the President Trump are up there defending Hillary Clinton, which is outrageous. And so we're going to wait to see what the court finally rules. And, depending on what the court rules, there may be further litigation. But right now, the Trump administration is on the side of Hillary Clinton in keeping this information from you. And I think you should let people know about this. Ask what's up. Jeff Sessions is doing so much great work over at the Justice Department. But on these corruption issues, it is a mess and it's a disaster. On transparency, it's a mess and it's a disaster. And who does it protect? It protects the bad guys. And along those lines, we've got this new information that the Trump team was wiretapped by the Obama gang. Paul Manafort, who was Trump's campaign manager for a time, it's now been reported, it's been leaked, that there was a FISA warrant, F-I-S-A, Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act warrant, which is a warrant issued under the national security powers of the United States, foreign intelligence collection powers. It's an awesome power they have. And they were wiretapping someone who was in regular contact with Trump. It's not clear when they were doing it. Maybe it was after he was in the campaign or out of it. But he lived at Trump Tower. And this, by the way, they reissued a FISA warrant after years of investigating Manafort and not being able to find anything. Oh, well, then he became chairman of the Trump campaign, and guess what? The Obama people figured they needed to keep on watching him. Isn't that outrageous? Now, everyone says, well, he was communicating with the Russians. That wasn't the reason, because Hillary Clinton was communicating with the Russians. Her foundation was communicating with the Russians. John Podesta was communicating with the Russians. There's probably a list a mile long of individuals here in the United States, and certainly here in town, who worked for and were communicating with Russian interests. So don't you buy it. This is the same agencies, the FBI and the Justice Department, that went after James Rosen, the Fox contributor, Fox News reporter, and his parents through this same FISA process. Of course, Fox was an enemy of the Trump-Obama administration. And that was done under Robert Mueller, by the way. This is the same administration who used the IRS, who wanted to use the FBI and the Justice Department to prosecute the groups the IRS was suppressing in 2012 in order to secure President Obama's re-election victory. Is it a stretch to believe they would have done the same? They wouldn't have done the same in 2016 to help protect Hillary Clinton and ensure that she won? We already know the Justice Department became an arm of the Hillary Clinton campaign and protected her. So did Mr. Comey, despite Mrs. Clinton's crocodile tears to the contrary. Is it a stretch to think that they were going after Trump similarly and spying on him and surveilling him and his team? I see James Clapper said, the former, I think, Director of National Intelligence under President Obama, they all made fun of Trump when he said that he thought he was being wiretapped. And then Clapper said, oh, that's not true, and Comey suggested it wasn't true under oath. And I guess Clapper's just quoted recently saying, it's possible maybe Trump's voice was picked up on these wiretaps. What? Is Mueller going to investigate that? Is he going to investigate whether the FBI and Justice Department and the Obama administration, who authorized these FISAs, whether they were asked for in good faith, whether it was a political operation under the guise of foreign intelligence surveillance? Mueller isn't going to do that because he did some of the same stuff himself, both with the IRS and against James Rosen. There's also news today or this week, if the news reports are to be believed. Now, I don't know if some of these reports are true because it's all leaks and such, so who knows who's leaking what and for what reason and what interest they have and what information is being leaked and what's being withheld that could give you further context. Manafort's home was raided. It's never happened before in the history of special counsels where you had, according now to reports this week, Manafort's home being raided by agents with guns drawn. It's also reported Mueller's investigation is now harassing the Trump administration, the Trump White House, with requests for documents about the president's core decision-making powers as president, which is to hire and fire individuals in his agencies, like the FBI director, like General Flynn. I don't think Flynn should have been fired. But it's no business, in my view, of the special counsel to be rummaging around the president's decision-making processes here. There's no evidence anything was done wrong. And again, this gets back, and I've said it again, I've said it once and I'll say it again, I don't believe the Mueller investigation is proper constitutionally speaking. And my thinking on this is he can only be fired for cause. I don't understand where that comes from. He's not a king. He's not an FBI director. He works for the president. Why does he can only be fired by cause? Is he a super bureaucrat? Plus, he hasn't been confirmed by the Senate, and he's not subject to the proper supervision by someone who has been. Rod Rosenstein was interviewed, it's reported, by Mueller today not today, but it's been reported. Rosenstein was interviewed by Mueller's people about the Comey firing this past summer. Now, Rosenstein is now a witness in the case. The only reason he's making decisions about appointing Mueller is because Sessions recused himself. It is a constitutional mess. I don't know how you slice it. Now, it's reported Mueller interviewed for the job of FBI director after Comey was fired with President Trump. Is Mueller going to interview himself now? So you've got these constitutional concerns that I've raised repeatedly. And then you've got these conflict of interest concerns. And if there's anything that needs to be under investigation, it's Mr. Comey, who walked off with documents he didn't have a right to, supposedly. I'm assuming he created the documents when he says, well, he's FBI director, not after the fact, which I'm suspicious about. And then he authorized them to be linked to the New York Times in order to get a special counsel appointed, his buddy Robert Mueller. Where is Congress? Where is the Justice Department? Where is the media on this abuse of power by Justice Department officials targeting Trump, wiretapping Obama's political opposition? Did President Obama know that the chairman of Trump's campaign, I didn't even care if he was still in the campaign, but the chairman of Trump's campaign was being wiretapped in this way? Who else were they wiretapping that we don't know about yet? Don't rely on Mueller to figure this out, because he's using the results of these illicit wiretaps, I guarantee you, in his effort to get Manafort. And I don't know if Manafort committed any crimes yet, but we don't need a special counsel to figure it out. Certainly not one that's not under control. So this brings us to the broader issue. In every day, in every way, this Justice Department and many of the president's agencies, the executive branch agencies, are defending Hillary Clinton and the Obama regime. They're defending and protecting them. And I'm just going to go through, I'm going to do a little bit of a dive here, but it's important to know. So Hillary Clinton misused her email account, right? And she had classified information on the system, which was a violation of the law, despite what the corrupted FBI director, Mr. Comey, thinks. You can't put classified information on unsecure networks. It's a violation. So you can presume there could be damage to our national security as a result. In fact, that was the assumption of the FBI, even as they exonerated or gave Hillary Clinton a get-out-of-jail-free card. So Judicial Watch looked at the regulations and recognized that the national security community is supposed to do a damage assessment when there is suspected improper release or mishandling classified information. Well, surprise, surprise, the Obama administration didn't follow that basic law and that basic regulation. So what Judicial Watch did is we asked the Trump administration to do this. And Dan Coats, who's the Office of Director of National Intelligence now, the State Department run by Rex Tillerson, essentially told us to jump in a lake. So we sued. So we're right now in federal court trying to get the Trump administration to do a damage assessment on behalf of our national security over Mrs. Clinton's classified emails or the mishandling of those. Remember the top secret material on there? I think it's top secret compartmentalized information. It doesn't get any more secure than that. And you know what they're telling us? Again, Trump administration appointees in these agencies, represented by Justice Department lawyers, are come back in court and say, Mrs. Clinton's compromise of national security information wasn't serious enough to warrant a damage assessment. Can you believe that's what's happening right now under this Trump administration? So when you see President Trump complain about the lawyers, I guarantee you this is the sort of thing he's thinking about. Who is running the store at the Justice Department, at the State Department, at the Office of Director of National Intelligence? I mean, they're raiding this guy Paul Manafort's home with guns drawn, and we're asking for an administrative analysis of the national security damage potentially by Mrs. Clinton's mishandling of classified information, and they're defending it in court that they don't have to do anything. Again, Judicial Watch is in court over this. They're also protecting Barack Obama. You may remember, you may remember how Barack Obama was interviewed by the FBI before he became president. Well, you may not remember that because the big media, his liberal allies in the media, don't want to remind you of that. Usually, presidents have to wait a few months before the FBI starts interviewing them. You know, the scandals don't happen immediately. Barack Obama, he managed to get interviewed by the FBI after he was elected president, but before he took office. So that's a new record. And this was over the sale of his Senate seat by Rod Blagojevich. You remember that Rod Blagojevich is now serving prison time in part based on the corruption associated with that. So they interviewed Valerie Jarrett, they interviewed Barack Obama. Now, when the FBI interviews you, they don't take notes, or the notes aren't publicly available, they're destroyed. They write a narrative report of what you said. I mean, it's sketchy. When you read enough of these 302s, you sometimes feel like you're reading a fictionalized version of the interview, but that's the way the FBI does it. So Judicial Watch has repeatedly gotten 302s, FBI summary reports. So we asked for the summary reports, the 302s of the Obama interviews. This administration has come back and said we can't have them because there were lawyers there. Never before. We've gotten Clinton 302s, we've gotten IRS scandal 302s. That's never come up before. In fact, we've gotten 302s, we've gotten FBI reports because lawyers that we were curious about were there, specifically in the IRS scandal. And this administration's lawyers have concocted a fake argument, in my view, legally. Sure, the lawyers will say, oh, no, Tom, it's not fake, there's credible... Believe me, it's fake. That we can't get Obama's 302s, even though we gotten 302s in all sorts of other circumstances. Again, the deep state protecting its own, and this Justice Department leadership is letting it happen. IRS. We're still battling the IRS on documents. Still battling the IRS on documents. Benghazi. We've been battling this administration on documents as well. On Benghazi, believe it or not. This administration didn't want to search Hillary Clinton's top aides' emails for Benghazi documents, or emails from Hillary Clinton about Benghazi. And we had to go to court, and the court said you have to search. I mean, this is crazy town. You got to search. We're talking about all these Clinton emails, and the State Department doesn't even want to look in the State Department for them. Again, this is not under President Obama or President Clinton, it's under President Trump, and his appointees are either out to lunch, insubordinate, or hostile to the idea of transparency and the rule of law. And they don't care one whit about corruption issues. And it's really outrageous. And I can go on list after case after case after case where this issue has come up. Now they're thinking they're going to protect President Trump over the long run. My guess is President Trump doesn't buy any of that. And the irony here is that we can't get anything about Obama-Clinton, or have to fight tooth and nail to get it, or wait forever to get it. So it's either fighting to get the info, and when they say they're going to give it to you, you have to wait forever. Like the Clinton emails, they want us to wait as long till 2020 to get all the Clinton emails they have. But there is a complete blackout, by the way, on the Russia info. So the deep state is protecting Hillary and Obama, and also withholding documents that I'm convinced, if released, would probably be helpful to President Trump. Of course, and probably not helpful to President Obama and his gang, who were probably involved in leaking or improperly surveilling, leaking classified material or improperly surveilling the Trump team. But we're getting nowhere with this administration. They're protecting the deep state's surveillance operations that were so improper and concerning, and the leaks associated with that, the unmaskings and such. They don't want to give us anything. They don't want to give us the Comey memos. The unmaskings. Susan Rice admitted to unmasking Trump associates after denying that she did that. So that's the report. The NSA, the National Security Agency, just sent us a letter the other day saying they can't confirm or deny about any unmaskings. What is going on here? Again, I'm not just complaining about it. I'm telling you that Judicial Watch is in court fighting for this information. And there's no other group doing what Judicial Watch is doing to hold the government to account. Judicial Watch has filed dozens of lawsuits against the Trump administration to get access to government information. I'll say it again. Judicial Watch has filed dozens of lawsuits against the Trump administration to get access to information. We have well over a dozen lawsuits related to the Russia investigation. And some of those disclosures, they may not be helpful to President Trump, but we want the information. And we're facing obstruction in a massive way, especially on this deep state Russia project. So we're in court battling. We're in court today, just now. I gave you the special report. And I don't know what would happen if we weren't doing it. I really don't. Seems like we're the only ones raising questions about the constitutional issues related to Robert Mueller and the abuses there. Congress doesn't want to do any investigations. I recall talking to someone recently on the Hill, and he said Republicans like the Mueller investigation because it gives them an excuse not to talk about the Russia investigation and to do the work they're supposed to do as members of Congress to provide oversight for this out-of-control Justice Department. So there are sort of a few things you should know. You need to support Judicial Watch because we're doing this work, as I point out, but you need to hold the Trump administration to account and let the president know you're unhappy with his appointees. My guess is he's unhappy with his appointees too. He was threatening to fire Sessions over his failures related to the Russia investigation. And I want to let you know again, this Mueller investigation is serious. It's targeting Trump. They want to put Trump in jail or his family or associates in jail. And it doesn't matter what the Constitution says about how these operations are supposed to be run. It doesn't matter if there's a good faith basis to do it. It doesn't matter if the whole investigation was engendered through criminal acts by current and government former employees. They're targeting Trump. So the rules are off. So we got to stand fast for the rule of law together. So I appreciate you bearing with me as I went through this with you, but these are important issues. I've been repeatedly pushing this on Twitter and on Facebook, Instagram. Judicial Watch is getting the word out. We're in court. We're not just talking about this. As I said, we're in court with dozens of cases. And Congress isn't going to do it. The Justice Department is AWOL, and we are doing the heavy lifting that the rest of establishment Washington doesn't want to do in terms of holding this corrupt swamp to account. So keep on tracking our work. Thank you for your support if you're already supporting us. If you're not, I hope you consider supporting us. And we'll be back next week and as events warrant. And have a great weekend.